Oh, Ash versus Yugi, huh? Alright, Death Battle, let's do this. Let's get this over with. This is one of those matchups that I have seen all the time and for years now, and it has just never been a matchup that made much sense to me. And not necessarily in the sense of I don't understand why it's popular. I absolutely get why a lot of people request it. It's very straightforward. You've got two very popular, very iconic, internationally famous franchises in Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon clashing against each other. That I get. What I don't get is, in the sense of a death battle, of a fight, how exactly is this supposed to work? It makes no freaking sense. For example, just asking a simple question of, how are they going to fight? So, I'm guessing presumably Ash is going to use his Pokemon. Okay, fine, fair enough, they did the same thing with Red. But in regards to Yugi, what's he going to use? Is he going to use his cards? If so, how is that going to work? Because the dual disc doesn't actually bring the cards to life. All it does is just create holographic projections of the cards. Now, sure, you can maybe make the argument, well, couldn't Yugi turn the fight into a shadow game? I guess, sure, you can make the argument he could do that, but there's not very many examples of Yugi doing that. In fact, Yugi actually explicitly hates shadow games, and the only reason he participated in any of them was to put an end to shadow games and get the Millennium items away, but that's neither here nor there. The main point I have with this fight is, how is this fight even supposed to work? Because whether you try to make the argument of, well, Yugi would use his cards, well, let's say I give that to you, well, that still doesn't really answer the question, because how is that supposed to work? Because Yugi, believe it or not, actually has more than one deck. In fact, I think from what I read, because I was recently on a Yu-Gi-Oh! Wiki not too long ago, and I found out that Yugi has like a new deck, like every new arc. Like he has a deck for Battle City, a deck for Duelist Kingdom, and he has his grandpa's deck right at the beginning. So how does all of that work? Like, for example, is Yugi allowed access to Exodia, for example? Because if so, that ends the fight right there. And how are you going to quantify the strength of a Yu-Gi-Oh card versus that of a Pokemon? Because for all intensive purposes, Pokemon are at least living beings, right, with powers. Whereas Yu-Gi-Oh cards, they don't really have power. Yeah, there is the whole thing of these were monsters that once had power and were brought back to life through some kind of Egyptian magic or something. But is that what this is going to become a battle of? Yugi's Egyptian magic versus Ash's Pokemon? And that still presents even more problems, because what about Ash's Pokemon? In the same way that Yugi has a bunch of cards, what? So is Yugi going to pull out Dark Magician Girl, and then start whipping out trap cards on Ash's Pokemon? And even then, how is that going to work? Are they only going to let Ash use 6 of his Pokemon? Or are they going to give him all of his Pokemon? And if you're going to do that, well, then this quickly just turns into an absolute clusterfuck. Or are they only going to give Yugi and Ash their most main monsters that they're associated with? Okay, does Ash get Charizard, Pikachu, Squirtle, and whatever? And does Yugi get Dark Magician Girl? And what about the God cards? Because towards the end of the Yu-Gi-Oh series, Yugi has all 3 of the Egyptian God cards too. So there's just so many ways in which in my head in which I don't get how Death Battle is going to make this work on any level. And here's another big problem. See, unlike Ash, Yugi actually has powers through the Millennium Puzzle. In fact, for those of you who have only watched the anime, especially the 4Kids one, and never read the manga, Yugi has a body count. Yugi has killed people. Whenever he used his mind shatter or whatever it was called. Yeah, in the manga, he killed people with that. And then in volume 1 of the manga, there's this one part of the story where he brings somebody into the Millennium Puzzle, has a conversation with them, and then turns the guy's chair into like some kind of crocodile monster thing, and then bites the dude's head off. I'm not even joking, look it up. But there's just so many ways in which I don't get this fight. This sounds like less of Yugi versus Ash and more so Ash's Pokemon versus Yugi's monsters. So I really don't understand this. And with the way that Death Battle had Charizard versus Greymon play out, I'm not even sure that I would trust Death Battle to even do Pokemon justice. And if I don't trust them to do Pokemon justice, you think that I believe that there's a chance in hell they would get Yu-Gi-Oh right? Death Battle has a history of not being able to power scale or represent universes accurately. So I really don't understand how this is supposed to work. I guess if I had to like make a prediction, even though this is kind of just like a impromptu reaction, I don't really have like a script or anything like that. But if I had to like make a prediction like I used to back in the day, I guess I would have to go with Yugi. Because again, Yugi has more powers and Yugi is more dangerous. Technically speaking, Yugi wouldn't even need his monsters to kill Ash. He could just use his mind shatter or bring him into the Millennium Puzzle, and at that point, Yugi controls everything because he has absolute control over the Millennium Puzzle. So, just what the heck? Like, what are we doing here, Death Battle? What exactly is the end goal here? I get that some of these matchups are like really highly requested, and I get that you have to do what your fans want. Believe me, I get that, Death Battle. I've been there before. I've had to make some videos I wasn't really keen on making, but my fans wanted them, and I had to respect that. Then at a certain point in Death Battle, and I know you did a podcast talking about Ash versus Yugi. I can't remember if I watched that one or not, because at a certain point, I just stopped watching the Death Battle podcast. But what I will say is, at any point in Death Battle, do you ask yourself questions like, would this matchup actually work realistically? Like, how could we have this matchup work? How could we have these two characters fight each other? And I won't get too deep into it here, but it's similar problems with the whole Light Yagami versus Columbo thing. How is Death Battle going to make Light Yagami versus Columbo work? A battle of wit. This is the same Death Battle that can barely handle fights with like Naruto and Ichigo, Madara and Aizen, Big Head and Deadpool. Like, they can barely handle those fights. And I'm supposed to be expected to believe that you're gonna make a fight between Ash and Yugi work? Yeah, sorry, but I'm gonna have to go ahead and press X to doubt on that one. I've been burned by Death Battle one too many times. And again, there's just too many problems here, because how is Yu-Gi-Oh cards going to interact with Pokemon? Are they going to use the same rules? For example, Yu-Gi-Oh typings may exist in Yu-Gi-Oh! Yes, they do have elemental typings. There are dark types, fire types, air types, and all that. But it doesn't work on the same principles as Pokemon. And is the rock, paper, scissors elemental advantage thing going to have an effect against these monsters? Also, what about monsters with card effects? For example, there are cards like Obnoxious Celtic Guardian that can't be destroyed by battle if the monster has more than 1900 attack points. How is that supposed to work? What about cards like 4-star Ladybug of Doom or Man-Eater Bug? Cards that straight up instantly destroy your monsters if they're either a 4-star monster, which that's another question in of itself. How are the stars going to translate to Pokemon? Or in the case of cards like Man-Eater Bug, it just outright kills you instantly when its flip effect is activated. And again, are the rules of a duel going to also clash with the rules of a Pokemon, with the rules of a Pokemon battle? Explain this to me, Death Battle. How are you going to make this work? Maybe I should go back and watch your podcast, but I just don't see any reality in which this fight could ever work on any level. There are too many questions That's why I was never, ever, ever excited about this matchup, and I never wanted to see it, because if even I'm like absolutely frying my brain trying to make sense of how this works, you think that Death Battle is going to be able to figure this out without just exploding? I both cringe and laugh trying to picture Death Battle and the researchers just trying to figure out, like, well, how do we have them fight each other? How do we power scale this? Remember, these are the same guys that complain about power scaling Final Fantasy and just absolutely is incapable of power scaling Bleach correctly. This is just one of those situations where this is not a matchup of good connections. These universes are not compatible with each other. There are some fights that are just not meant to be, no matter how cool you think it may be. Ash versus Yugi is not a fight that is meant to work. There's just too many caveats for it to work. And I'm not looking forward to it. I mean, of course, I'm going to end up having to review it anyway, but I'm already cringing thinking how this is going to turn out. And knowing Death Battle, they're just going to cheap out and use some sprite animation or something cheap, because Death Battle is having to panhandle because they don't know how to budget their own money and resources correctly. And from what I've seen of their Kickstarter, they've gotten maybe close to 200K, which would barely be enough to fund 1 or 2 episodes of Death Battle. Well, if you want high quality ones. I guess if you make them mostly sprite animations, you could potentially spread it out, which sounds like that's what Death Battle will do. And it's just such an indictment on how far Death Battle has fallen. They're panhandling for money. They almost died because Rooster Teeth sucks. And now they're doing stuff like this. They're so desperate to get money that they will literally go to their fans and say, hey, we need money. If you give us money, we'll do this matchup that you've been begging us to do for years. Even though realistically this matchup shouldn't even be possible. I mean, I'll hold my breath, and if somehow Death Battle proves me wrong, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's something in the Yu-Gi-Oh lore I'm missing. I'll admit, I haven't really checked up on my Yu-Gi-Oh lore too much. I mean, I've read a little bit of the manga, I've watched the anime. It's been a while since I've watched the anime. I still played the card game regularly with my friends, but again, I just don't understand how Death Battle is going to make this work. I was chatting with my little brother about this, and even he couldn't make any kind of sense of it, because he pointed out the same thing that I pointed out. The dual discs only create holograms. That's all they are. How are these holograms going to interact with actual living beings like Pokemon? And if Yugi's going to use his magic, well, then I would ask the question, why wouldn't Yugi just mind crush him and end the fight right then and there? And since we know that Death Battle will throw character out the window to make a fight work, Yugi's morality, if it's going to be thrown away, then if you bring in a Yami that's not being held back or kept in check by Yugi, then yeah, Yami is just gonna kill Ash in about 5 seconds if he sees him as any kind of threat, because he's done this before. Yami is quite cold-blooded. So yeah, that's just kind of my real first thoughts on Ash Ketchum versus Yugi. I still can't believe this is actually happening. I would love to be able to just pinch myself and wake up from this dream, but no, this is very real, and this is my hell. But hey, this is also what I signed up for. So we'll see how this plays out. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys around next time.